Hello! Quite a big topic today. Let's start with a brief definition about what veganism is. It's like refraining of eating animal products in order to minimize suffering. Okay, how about antinatalism? Antinatalism is just refraining from giving birth or having children. Antinatalism is the view that life is inherently bad. So by giving birth to children, we put them in an unnecessary harm. You could say that those both philosophies or ideologies just stand upon not putting other beings in an unnecessary harm. You could say that they're both derived from the harm principle, that we shouldn't put beings in an unnecessary harm. You can say that veganism and antinatalism are the most noble philosophies because they don't want to put other beings in harm, humans and animals alike. But I really want to talk about a little bit about this harm principle. I mean, where does it come from? Because vegans and antinatalists argue that we shouldn't put humans and animals alike into harm unnecessarily. So I want to highlight this term, unnecessarily. I really want to ask this question. Why can we put our lives above other beings, animals and humans alike? It seems that this whole moral system that we shouldn't harm other beings unnecessarily could be activated when the situation is not that tight, but could be unactivated or disabled when the situation is tight. I mean when it's necessary, we can just harm other beings, but when it's unnecessary, we cannot harm them. My perspective on this would be that when we are at ease, we enjoy the pleasure that comes from being compassionate with other beings. But when our survival is threatened, sorry, you have been unequal all the time. You have been an inferior being to us all the time. Therefore, we can just subject you to harm because right now it's necessary. If it was unnecessary, we wouldn't be doing otherwise. But right now it's unnecessary. It figures that you were unequal and inferior to us the whole time. Therefore, this moral principle, this whole moral system could be activated only when we are at ease, when our survival is not threatened, and when the situation is not tight. Therefore, we get at first the pleasure of compassion when we are at ease, but when our survival is threatened, like for example, we get really hungry that we cannot eat anything else but an animal product, or that giving birth to a child, to a person, is necessary for some type of family heritage, or that our position in the family or our economic or social state would be threatened when I do not produce a child. There's just two pleasures. First, there is the pleasure of compassion. When I'm compassionate with an animal that I do not eat, because I'm compassionate that I could eat several other replacements. There is also the pleasure in not having a child. There's the pleasure of being compassionate, not bringing this child to this world because life is inherently bad, presumably from an anti-natalist perspective. Then B, you have the pleasure of surviving when the situation is tight from eating an animal, or the pleasure of protecting yourself by having a child when your state, your financial state or economic or social state is threatened. Alright, therefore we have pleasure of compassion and pleasure of survival. They are both pleasures. How could we differentiate between them? The fact that we can differentiate between them amazes me, and also emphasizes the idea that this is not a principle at all. But the principle actually includes unnecessary. When it is unnecessary, I can be a principled person. But when it is necessary, I can just be harsh, and I can just do whatever I want. Of course, there is no good or bad about any of those two cases. Good or bad does not really exist. A noble action doesn't really exist except in our imagination. It's entirely subjective. If all humans were extinct, a noble deed wouldn't exist as well, like gravity or a mountain or the moon or something else. It exists only in our imagination. Humans came up with it in order to reinforce our survival as a global tribe. Okay, it's time for me to compare those two philosophies, veganism and antinatalism. Alright, veganism stands upon those premises. If you agree with those premises, you must agree with the conclusion necessarily. Okay? And antinatalism also stands on those premises. If you agree with the premises, you must also agree with the conclusion necessarily. They both entail harm. You could see that they are both noble philosophies. They are both sharing the idea that we shouldn't be putting other beings in unnecessary harm. So based on that, I believe that a vegan should also be an anti-natalist. Otherwise, he is being a hypocrite. Why is that? Because if you apply this moral system on animals that you don't want them to suffer unnecessarily, you might as well apply the principle on humans as well. Or are you being compassionate with other species and not being compassionate with your own species? So if you were a vegan and procreationist, you apply the harm principle on animals, but don't for humans. It's a contradiction. Okay, vegans would just argue that life is not inherently bad for humans, but it's really bad for animals. We know it's crystal clear for animals. And the fact that we are eating more meat, the more we eat meat, the more animals suffer. Alright, but I could also argue that life also is inherently bad for people. If you say that animals are being bred in a factory farm, I could say also that the world is a huge factory farm for humans themselves. I've already done a thought experiment in my previous video on anti-natalism. A procreationist would say that life is a gift and that living life is a great experience because how much joy or how much pleasant experiences it provides. But alright, but he or she must also acknowledge that life entails also pain. Okay, right now we have established that life is pleasure and pain. Then what we should do? Imagine with me, I subject you to the maximum amount of pleasure, whatever you can think about. Not even what you can think about, but because your imagination could be limited. But let's subject you to the maximum amount of pleasure there is, alright? For 1 hour, but after that, we will subject you for the maximum amount of pain there is, okay? Would it be worth it? Would you want to go through this experience? I believe you wouldn't want to, because it would be horrible. Because the weight of suffering always is harsher, much harder than the weight of pleasure. Whatever pleasure there is, if we compare it with some type of pain, pain would also be more heavy. Pain would also be more strong. Okay, then if we had a spectrum and the maximum amount of pleasure doesn't equal necessarily the maximum amount of pain, therefore across all the spectrum, pain is dominant and life is inherently bad because pain is always much harsher than pleasure. You would say, I know there's a counter argument to this that would say but the fact that we are living organisms and we are humans, we have evolved minds and we could just stay away from pain and try as much as we can enjoying pleasure. Yes, you could. But you cannot. If we had happiness in our dictionary, we have also depression. If we have life, we have death. If we have joy, we have sadness. Each pleasant feeling would have its own contradiction, would have its own contradictory concept following it. And you cannot feel A without feeling B. B is necessary for the existence of A, but B is always harder and much heavier than A, therefore B is prevalent and dominant. Then it's unnecessary to bring a human to existence because B is prevalent more than A, even if it seems that A is worth it. A is pleasure and B is pain, by the way. I have already gone through this. You would say that you are a parent, that you would make your son's life a pleasant experience, that you would try as hard as you can to just give your child the best life that you could have. I would say that all of the parents do the same thing and say the same thing. They all want to do the same thing. They all have this inclination to do the same thing. They even promise themselves to give their children the most moral support, financial support, emotional support, whatever. But shit still happens. Shit still happens always. If that was true and they were honest, the world would be just a pleasant place and life would be just a great experience. That suffering wouldn't exist. But I cannot say that they are liars because being a liar must necessarily include that you knowing the truth, but the parent is just being very optimist. He doesn't know the truth that this will happen. He's just saying something out of joy or whatever. Therefore, if you follow the argument and I got you convinced that life is inherently harmful and bad, and or if you were already convinced that life is harmful, the same principle that would be applied on consuming animal products would also be applied on giving birth to children. There is no difference. When you eat meat, you encourage more cattle breeding, more animal breeding, just in order for them to suffer. If you also acknowledge that life is inherently bad, we are doing the same thing by getting married and having sex and producing children. We are we are breeding inside this whole factory farm just in order to suffer in this place, in this world, and die at the end. So if you have this moral system and you accept it, but you apply it only on animals, but don't apply it for humans, you're being a hypocrite. I mean, vegan activists just try to convince as much as they could about this ideology, not eating meat. In social media, in person, talking groups, and you could see there is a lot of effort being done just to minimize the consumption of meat. But at the same time, they go have sex and have children. What gives? What gives? Oh my God. I need also to say this. If you accept the harm principle for antinatalism, you need also to accept it for veganism. It goes also the other way around, okay? By eating meat, you encourage breeding, more animal production. You encourage more suffering being done in factories, in farms, and etc. It's the same. If you acknowledge that life is inherently bad for humans, I could only imagine how it is for animals. So, vegan procreationists, being the main topic of our discussion in this episode, would have no other argument to break from this from this dilemma, from this contradiction, except to appeal to self-pleasure and self-interest. I know everything revolves around self-interest, but they would only say that, what about my pleasure of being a parent? What about my pleasure of being a mother and a father? What about the pleasant experience that I would just go through if I had a son or a daughter? Which would be countered by, how about my pleasure of eating meat? But they wouldn't accept this, but they would accept that, which is hypocrisy, sadly. Because under the pre-established moral system, they're both unnecessary, therefore they are both harmful. Therefore, we shouldn't be doing it. Then why would you be compassionate with animals and not compassionate with humans? I don't understand. I feel the need to say this. There is nothing as noble about those both philosophies, antinatalism and veganism, because they're both derived from a self-interest. There is no good, there is no bad. It's just our own imagination. It's good that you want to minimize suffering. Yes, good, but not good, like objectively good. It's just subjectively good. And if you want to do that, it's okay. And it's fine if you want just to consume meat and have as much as you like of children. But the problem is, if you were vegan or anti-natalist and still consuming meat, or vegan but still having children, and you assume that you have a principle or a moral system that you are subscribed to, you automatically lose the label as being a principled person, because you fall into hypocrisy. If you accept it for animals, you should also accept it for humans necessarily, because the same principle applies on both sides of the deal. If you don't eat animals but go on and have children, you are not principled. And if you don't have children and go on and eat animals, you are not principled either. Nevertheless, people would just go on trying to defend themselves with multiple arguments, trying to be consistent and fiercely demonstrate defensive arguments to their cases. But they could just say that I do not care. They could just say that. I mean, there's no problem with that. I do not care. You could only say that you care only about your self-interest and your self-pleasures. Of course, this is the case for everyone. For everyone. We love our friends because we love ourselves. We love our parents because we love ourselves. We love our animals because we love ourselves. I cannot love anything else outside of myself. I cannot love the external except if there is something in it for me. Alright? If I had pleasure in refraining from eating animals, I have also pleasure in eating animals. They're both pleasures. How can I discriminate between them? If you would say no, minimizing suffering, we should all put hand in hand to minimize suffering, why would I care? So the difference between you and them, that would be just the fact that you are acknowledging that you are being selfish, but they don't. And everybody's selfish. Everybody is doing something out of self-interest. There's always a pleasure at the end of every action that we do. The same also applies on anti-natalists. By eating meat, you encourage breeding more goats, sheep, chicken, cows, pigs, whatever. And you won't bring new humans to existence. How about bringing poor goats and bunnies? Aren't we all the same? I could argue that a human feels more pain than an animal, because a human has also the nervous system that could feel pain because of evolution, but has also the psychological side, which could be also argued about animals. Animals also could be argued that they feel pain when they are separated from their families or watch a member of their group dies. But I don't have enough data to really argue about this. Please bear in mind that I'm not preaching or dictating things to do or not. I'm just putting out contradictions. That's all I'm doing. After all, I could be wrong about this whole thing. But there is no wrong. There is no right. But wait, we are all voluntarily playing in this game called morality. This game includes some rules which are called logic. Okay? Therefore, we should abide to those rules because we are all inside this game. It's like chess. Then if we try to contradict something, then if we try to do something against the rules which are logic, a contradiction arises, and it should be pointed to. Therefore, in this game, there is right or wrong. As long as I am voluntarily subscribing to this moral system, subscribing to this game, voluntarily playing this game. But outside of this game, there is no right, there is no wrong. It's merely subjective. It's all just subjective opinion. Life is opinion. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. Please feel free to share with me your perspective about this in the comments. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next one.